politicians and activists seem extremely concerned about economic inequality. But the truth is that economic inequality is not just fair, but also desirable for society. Now, to be clear, I want to specify that I'm only talking about economic inequality and not other sorts of inequality. Of course, inequality other than economic inequality between individuals is not fair. It's not fair that one person is born perfectly abled and another is born handicapped. It's not fair that professional athletes like Mike Tyson were born with unmatched talent that they could leverage to earn millions. It's not fair that one person is born attractive and another is not. It's not fair that one person is born intelligent and another isn't. But these are all examples of inequality caused by nature. And of course, this is not fair. But at the same time, it's an absolutely futile endeavor to try and eradicate natural inequality. Because for the moment, it's not even possible. How are you going to make two people equally intelligent or attractive? I mean, things like good education and plastic surgery can significantly improve your intelligence and attractiveness, but it's still not going to make two very different people equal. Having said that, we should keep in mind that the beauty of nature is how different each person is. As pointed out by Milton Friedman, can you imagine how insipid and dull the world would be if we were all perfectly equal and exactly the same carbon copies of each other, like a set of relics in a museum? And now that we've spoken about natural inequality and how it's impossible to get rid of, let's look at economic inequality with an example. I want to start by pointing out something Thomas Sowell said that pretty much explains why you can't blame capitalism or any other system for inequality. Sowell said, if two people born from the same parents with the same genetics and same resources don't end up equal and have different incomes, how in the world can any system make two individuals from completely different backgrounds equal? And even if you could somehow ensure economic equality between all the people, it would not really be desirable. Economic inequality is desirable for individuals and society because people have different interests and desires. Some people want to spend 12 to 15 hours a day at work, while others want to spend less time working and more time pursuing other activities. Even if you compare two people in the same field of work with a relatively similar skill set who both have the capability to earn the same amount of money if they made the same choices, it would not be right or desirable to force them to make the same choices. For example, if person A decides to work at an organization that only requires them to work a fixed 8-hour day, 5 days a week, and they can relax at a lake or a beach over the weekend, and they earn enough to meet all the expenses of their family and still have some leftover money for luxuries, while person B works 12 hours a day, 6 to 7 days a week, and they have no time for leisure or their family and friends, but they earn 5 times as much as person A. This inequality is clearly not a problem for society. These are different choices made by different people, and it's in the best interest of a country or society to protect this freedom of individual choice. The crux of my argument here is that if person A earns enough to live comfortably, how does it matter what person B earns in comparison? Therefore, economic inequality in itself is not a bad thing and is actually desirable. Let me illustrate this further. It doesn't sit right with some people that a minimum wage worker could work the same hours as the CEO of their company and still get paid 1,000 times less. However, if a minimum wage worker earned enough to cover all their expenses, had a house and a car, adequate savings and leftover money for holidays, nobody would be rightfully concerned if a CEO working the same hours was earning 1,000 times more. All because the underlying problem is poverty and a low standard of living, not inequality. We don't care, and shouldn't care, about economic inequality between two people if the poorer of them is still earning enough to cover their basic expenses and live a comfortable life. So clearly, economic inequality is not the problem at all. Poverty, basic needs being unmet, and low standards of living are the problem. If the poorest of us had a high enough standard of living, it wouldn't matter how much more a CEO of a hedge fund or Elon Musk makes in comparison. Therefore, if an activist, politician, organization, or government talks about economic inequality being a problem, they're not interested in reducing poverty, raising people's standard of living, or helping people in need. They're simply creating an enemy for disaffected people and distracting everyone from the fact that the government can do nothing to reduce poverty or increase people's standard of living except for protecting the free enterprise system. Let me ask you this. Would anyone be okay with inequality being completely eradicated if that meant that everyone was guaranteed a standard income by the state, ensuring that everyone is equal? But nobody will be able to afford basic necessities with that standard income, and anyone who tried to amass their own wealth through voluntary transactions would have their wealth confiscated. Doesn't sound good, does it? Well, so far, unsurprisingly to many, this is the only equality that any government on earth has ever been able to achieve. The only time any government in the history of mankind has made people equal, it's done this by making people equally poor. There's no government in history that has raised the standard of living of all their citizens equally to that of the median income bracket of America. And if you think people being equally poor and suffering together in solidarity is a good thing, let me remind you that the government employees and the leaders of the system in charge of making sure everyone is equal are not going to be poor themselves. They'll control all the money, and anyone with that much power is definitely going to be corrupt. So if you wouldn't want the worst politician you've ever seen, be it Donald Trump, Joe Biden, or Hitler, to be in charge of all the money and have that level of power over all the citizens, then you shouldn't want a system where the government controls all the wealth. Because those horrible politicians are exactly the ones who will end up in those positions of power. To wrap it up, if we just want to make sure that the most downtrodden are doing okay and have their basic needs met with some leftover money for leisure, this has absolutely nothing to do with inequality. And the richest, most successful or luckiest people shouldn't even be brought up in this discussion. Them being rich has absolutely no effect on poverty and people's basic needs being unmet. There's an interesting tweet that proves this. The 550 American billionaires together are worth $2.5 trillion. If we confiscated 100% of their wealth, we'd raise enough to run the federal government for less than 8 months. This was in 2019, but it's still true if adjusted for 2024, where the combined wealth of the 737 American billionaires is $5.5 trillion, and the US government spent $6.3 trillion in 2023. This means that the government spends more than the combined wealth of all the billionaires every single year. And if they haven't been able to eradicate poverty, raise the standard of living for the poorest people, or solve any of the problems that politicians and activists claim would be solved by taxing the rich, then their plan to tax billionaires is a reflection of their hatred towards the rich and productive, rather than compassion for the poor.